All right, welcome to The Explainer. You know how we do it here? We take big, complicated topics and we break them down. Today, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to tell the economic story of an entire country, but as if it were a family drama.
Okay, let's start with something we all get, right? You need some money. Maybe for a car, maybe to fix the roof. What do? You go to a bank. Simple.
Now, what about the banks? What happens when they need money? Well, they have their own bank they can go to, the central bank. It's kind of like the bank for banks, you know? It's there to make sure everything keeps running smoothly.
Okay, so a person goes to a bank goes to the central bank, but where does a whole country go when it's in trouble? That's where things get really, really interesting. And that's the story we're going to unpack today. The story of your aunt, let's call her Egypt, and her wild economic ride over the last 50 years.
So let's rewind the clock. We're in the late 70s, heading into the 80s. The big wars are over, which sounds like good news, right? But for your aunt, the financial problems, well, they were just getting started. It was like a perfect storm brewing. First, she makes a peace deal with Israel. Now, politically, that's one thing, but economically, her Arab allies were not happy. They basically turned off the money faucet. And at the exact same time, all these old loans she'd taken out started coming due. Her foreign debt shot up to $12 billion. And believe me, the debt collectors were calling.
So, what do you do when you can't pay your bills? You borrow more, right? And that's exactly what happened. The problem just spiraled out of control. It went from bad to worse. And by the time the 90s rolled around, that debt had exploded. We're talking a staggering $50 billion.
And get this is the crazy part. She owes $50 billion. So you'd hope she has some savings, right? Well, her entire piggy bank, all her foreign reserves, had just $3 billion in it. Think about that. Owe 50, have 3. She was literally on the brink of going completely broke.
So, it looks like it's game over. There's no way out. But then, something completely unexpected happens. A war breaks out somewhere else in the region. And crazy as it sounds, that crisis turned out to be her salvation.
So check this out. The Gulf War kicks off, and at first, it's terrible for her economy, right? Tourism collapses, Suez Canal traffic dries up. It's a disaster. But she makes a big bet. She joins the coalition. And that bet pays off big time. In return, the U.S. forgives $7 billion in debt. The Gulf countries forgive another $7 or $8 billion. We're talking about almost half of her entire debt just wiped away. It's an incredible example of how a big political move can totally flip your economic fortunes overnight.
Okay, so after that near-death experience in the 80s, your aunt learned a serious lesson. She got, super careful with money. She basically became allergic to borrowing from other countries. Never again, she thought. And you know what? It worked. Look at this. By 2010, for the first time in forever, her piggy bank, her savings, was actually bigger than what she owed. She had about $40 billion saved up and only owed $37 billion. This was huge. It meant she was finally standing on her own 2 feet, stable and independent.
And then, 2011 happened. The revolution. A moment of so much hope, so much energy for change, but from an economic point of view, it was the start of a whole new crisis.
So, to really get what happened next, we got to talk about something called the budget deficit. It sounds complicated, but it's not. All it means is you're spending more money than you're bringing in. And that gap, that shortfall, you have to fill it by borrowing. And that borrowing, well, that just becomes new debt.
And here's the thing. Before 2011, she was actually doing a pretty good job of shrinking that deficit. She was getting her spending under control. But after the revolution, whoa, it just blew up. Look at those numbers. From $140 billion to $230 to $270, all that extra spending just piling on more and more debt year after year.
Okay, so she's got this massive deficit. First, she borrows from her own local banks. Then, she gets some help from her friends, her allies. But eventually, those wells start to run dry. And that's when she turns to a last resort, a really, really risky one.
What's the risky option? She just asked the central bank to fire up the printing presses. Just print more money to pay the bills. It sounds easy, right? But Basic Economics 101 tells you that's a terrible idea. When you just create money out of thin air, you're not creating new value. You're just making every single bill that's already out there worth a little bit less. It's exactly like pouring water into a glass of juice. The more water you add, the weaker the juice gets.
And we're not talking about a little bit of printing here. We are talking about the central bank printing about 1 billion Egyptian pounds every single day. The result? Predictable. The value of the pound just collapsed. And the price of everything, especially anything you had to import, like food or fuel, which you pay for in US dollars, it just went through the roof.
So by 2016, it was déjà vu all over again. A full-blown crisis. The deficit was enormous, 350 billion pounds. That piggy bank that was once full? Yep, almost empty again. She had run out of options. There was only one door left to knock on.
And that door was the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. They agreed to help. They said, okay, we'll give you a $12 billion loan. But, and it's a huge but, it came with some very tough conditions. Think of it like tough love from a doctor. They said, first, you have to float your currency. Stop pretending it's worth more than it is and let the market decide its real value. And second, you have to cut back on government spending, especially those big subsidies on things like fuel. The idea was to force her to fix the root causes of the problem.
The impact was immediate and brutal. When they floated the currency, its value basically got cut in half, overnight. Can you imagine that? Your life savings, your salary, suddenly worth half of what it was the day before. The quote on the screen says it all. Congratulations, you are now below the poverty line. For a huge number of middle-class families, that's exactly what happened. It was a massive shock.
So where does that leave us? On the one hand, going to the IMF is like putting up a big sign that says, I'm in trouble. But on the other hand, it's also a sign that says, I'm serious about getting my house in order. And that seriousness can attract new investors, new money. It really leaves us with this big, open question about your aunt's future. Was all that pain, all that tough medicine, a sign that things had failed completely? Or was it the painful but necessary first step toward a real recovery? That's the question that still hangs in the air.